Namaskar. On behalf of India Foundation, I warmly welcome you all to the panel discussion on India's success in curbing left-wing extremism. This event is being jointly organized by India Foundation and India Habitat Center. We are privileged to have with us today an eminent panel comprising Shri Rajiv Gauba, former Cabinet Secretary, Government of India and member NITI Aayog, Shri Pankaj Kumar Singh, IPS, former Deputy National Security Advisor of India, and Shri Shekhar Gupta, Editor-in-Chief, The Print. May I request all panelists to kindly come up on stage. This session will be moderated by Captain Alok Bansal, Executive Vice President, India Foundation. Sir, kindly join us on stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this round of India Foundation, India Habitat Center discussion that we are having on a subject which is very, very important. I think if there is one arena on which government success is absolutely unqualified, it is as far as curbing left-wing extremism in India is concerned. From a time, we remember on 25th May 2013, we saw the fiasco when in Jiram Ghati, almost the entire leadership of Chhattisgarh Congress Party was wiped off in one brazen terrorist attack. Since then, there have been numerous attacks, not only in Chhattisgarh, but across different states in India. But from that state, we have now reached a stage where I think their activity is confined only to 3 districts. And as the Honorable Home Minister clarified very clearly that we will wipe off this menace by March this year. There is no doubt that this has been a success, an unqualified success, but how we attained it is what is important. And today, we really have a great panel. As you know, we have Shri Rajiv Gauba, Pankaj Kumar Singh ji, and Shekhar Gupta will be joining us in 2 to 3 minutes' time. He is en route. He's slightly stuck because of the traffic. So, without wasting much time, I'll now request Shri Rajiv Gauba, who needs no introduction. He was the Cabinet Secretary. He's presently a member of NITI Aayog. But more significantly, before becoming the Cabinet Secretary, he was the Union's Home Secretary. And so, I'll now request you, sir, to 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you, Alok. So, my co-panelist, Pankaj, with whom I have worked together in MHA, and distinguished members of the audience, very good evening. I am grateful to India Foundation for this opportunity to speak on a subject with which I have some familiarity, including first-hand experience. I have had to deal with left-wing extremism at different points of time in my career, from early 1980s until 1996. I worked in different parts of the then undivided Bihar as SDM in Sasaram, its CEO Jila Parishad in Patna district, and district magistrate of Gaya, Nalanda and Muzaffarpur. Each of these districts was affected by left-wing extremism, and that was the spread of the problem at that point of time. Some of these districts had small pockets of Maoist influence, like Muzaffarpur, but Gaya and Nalanda were very, very seriously affected. Even large parts of Patna, the capital of the state, the capital district, had a serious Naxal situation in the rural areas of the district. I mean, one incident I would just, recall to explain how grave the situation was those days, that I used to go for my morning game of tennis in the ASC North Center in Gaya, the army, and at 6 in the morning, and then suddenly my, driver came with there was a message on the wireless that the Takari police station had been attacked, looted, all the rifles and arms had been looted, and such incidents were not uncommon those days. Later, I handled the problem or the situation, the left-wing extremism, as Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Home, handling LWE Division and Kashmir Division, then as Chief Secretary Jharkhand, and then finally as Home Secretary in Government of India. And therefore, I feel a deep sense of satisfaction and relief that the scourge of left-wing extremism will hopefully be laid to rest this year, as the Home Minister has, pronounced publicly. It is certainly on its last legs, on that there is no doubt about that. You read every day, in the newspapers about top leadership of the Maoists being eliminated or surrendering. So this is one of the most spectacular success stories of dealing with an internal security challenge post-independence. The situation has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, and most of the top leadership has either been eliminated or they have surrendered. But back then the situation was quite grim. In 2014, for example, 88 security personnel were martyred and 222 civilians were killed. 63 Naxals also were killed. There were about 5,500 armed LWE cadres who were committing wanton killings and extortions at will. The origin of this movement, as you all know, is generally traced to the peasant uprising in 1967 in Naxalbari subdivision of Siliguri district in West Bengal. Peasants had been protesting there against the feudal system for a few years. And just days after the first non-Congress United Front government was sworn in, post the assembly elections in March 1967, they started forcibly seizing lands from jotdars or the landlords. By exploiting the dissatisfaction arising from issues of poverty, social inequality, gaps in governance, the Maoist movement slowly expanded its reach, and eventually they had succeeded in creating a continuous corridor running from Andhra Pradesh and Telangana into Chhattisgarh, large parts of Bastar, the undivided Bastar district, on to Odisha, Jharkhand, and adjoining areas of Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal, where for all practical purposes the writ of the government had ceased to run. They committed killings at will and prevented building of roads, expansion of telecom connectivity, even imparting school education. And realizing that a full-scale confrontation with the security forces will not succeed, they shunned open rebellion and adopted guerrilla warfare tactics, small mobile units carrying out ambushes and setting up alternative mechanisms of governance, like holding open courts, providing a form of rough and ready social justice and resource distribution in villages to gain local support. Over time, the movement had splintered into several different groups, but there were two major groups. The People's War Group operating in Andhra Pradesh and adjoining areas, and the Maoist Communist Center of India operating in Bihar and adjoining areas. In 2004, that was a watershed moment when these two major formations decided to merge to form the CPI Maoist, which became a very formidable organization. And after this merger, there was a sharp increase in violence across multiple states. In 2006, more than 500 people lost their lives. The number rose to 700 by 2010. That was kind of peak. And in 2006, the then Prime Minister of India had described Naxalism as the single biggest security challenge ever faced by our country, quote unquote. This is what the then Prime Minister had said. So these Maoists had mobilized substantial funds by threatening contractors engaged in mining, road construction, railway projects, acquired sophisticated weapons and communication equipment, and particularly mastered the use of IEDs to blow up roads, bridges, and launch spectacular attacks on security forces like April 2010, when a convoy of CRPF was ambushed, killing 76 CRPF personnel in one go. They were martyred, 76 personnel. And they conducted prison break operations and took hostages to secure the release of Maoist prisoners. There were IAS officers who were, collectors were kidnapped in some states. Initially, the state police in all these states, they were not equipped to deal with this kind of threat. Gradually, the state governments began to build up the capacities of the police. Andhra Pradesh, for example, formed a special task force, the Greyhounds, who were known for their exceptional jungle warfare skills. However, the responses were uneven and slow. But at a more fundamental level, and this I speak from personal experience, that the fight against Naxalism suffered from lack of clarity of approach and a certain ambivalence of the political and administrative leadership. Some elements in some political parties in the field were even mixed up with the Maoists and provided covert support and shelter to them in exchange for help during elections. Consequently, the Maoist violence kept rising, and over a period of nearly 5 decades, they have killed nearly 7,000 civilians, including a large number of women and children. The turning point came, so to speak, in 2015, when the Ministry of Home Affairs formulated a national policy and action plan, which was a whole of government and all-out approach, devoid of any self-doubt or ambivalence. Security interventions were significantly stepped up, and a saturation approach to development and welfare, ensuring the rights and entitlements, was implemented in mission mode. And it is this resolute implementation of action plan using the combined might of the state which has brought about the sea change in the scenario which we are witnessing today. Now, the saturation approach covered several important flagship schemes like free food grains under the PM Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, the 5 lakh annual health cover under Ayushman Bharat, housing with all basic amenities, Aadhaar cards, Jan Dhan bank accounts. Many guidelines of these schemes were liberalized or relaxed to ensure that no one in these districts is left out and every family is covered. Most of the LWE affected districts were covered also under the aspirational district program to rapidly uplift the socio-economic indicators there to the state and national level. A large number of residential schools were opened up, the Ekalavya model schools, Kendriya Vidyalayas, Navodaya Vidyalayas, ITIs and so on. Super specialty hospitals, field hospitals were set up, including by offering additional remuneration to doctors so that they will agree to go and serve there. Then there was aggressive and transparent implementation of Forest Rights Act, which gave forest dwellers, mostly tribals, a sense of security. Forest produce, they had the right to reap the forest produce. It ended their disputes with the local forest bureaucracy and consequent harassment as a result of those disputes which used to happen. Many states gave them the right to collect tendu leaves in forest areas, which also was a very significant factor. And then there was massive expansion of road and telecom connectivity. More than 15,000 kilometers of roads were constructed. Of course, it was not easy. These security forces started moving in deeper into the strongholds, and roads were constructed because they used to blow up roads while being constructed. So these happened in tandem, and more than 9,000 mobile towers were erected. And then, of course, there was expansion of bank branches and ATMs and post offices. These brought the fruits of development to the people and at the same time facilitated operations and mobility of the security forces. The new approach to security also focused on strengthening the state police. A number of schemes were implemented to strengthen the capacity of the state police, including fortification. Many police stations in these districts, which for example, where I served, did not have good buildings or fortification. And they were equipped with technical capacity for better intelligence gathering. Helicopters were deployed for movement of troops and drones for surveillance. Deployment of the central forces was significantly scaled up, And about 400 new camps have been established in various states over these last 10 years in tandem with construction of roads and opening up of these areas. Local youth with knowledge of terrain and modus operandi of the Maoists were inducted into CRPF under a special scheme called Bastaria Battalion. That is how the Maoists were gradually evicted from their strongholds like Buda Pahad in Jharkhand and now eventually Abu Jamad in Chhattisgarh. While Maoists indulged with impunity in brutal killings of civilians and security forces, they derived ideological support from intellectuals and academicians who often also gave them shelter and logistical support. And let's face it, suffering from the soft state syndrome, government never touched them for a long, long time. And this deep-rooted ecosystem in different institutions in urban areas, which often had linkages to some international organizations, needed to be systematically dismantled. Under the whole of government approach, a dedicated vertical was created in the National Investigation Agency for sustained investigation and prosecution of the Maoist leaders and the leaders of front organizations. Enforcement Directorate was activated to choke the financing of Naxalite groups. It is these concerted actions that dealt a significant blow to the financial and logistical networks which sustained the LWE. But over time, and I was witness to this when I was working in the district and the state, the movement had degenerated into a pure and simple extortion racket, bereft of any ideals, bereft of ideology. It had become, in a sense, an alternative mode of livelihood and employment for misguided youth. But as it often happens, once entrenched, these extremist groups continue violence to sustain their relevance. Many of the leaders had adopted ostentatious lifestyle. Their children studied in boarding schools. They had built houses in cities. It was important to expose the misdeeds of these leaders and the hollowness of their ideology to destroy their credibility and their appeal amongst the local people so as to dry up further recruitments. So as a result of all this, the situation today is, that the number of casualties or the deaths has declined very, very significantly. It is now down by 90% in 2025 as compared to 2010. And the number of districts affected by Naxalism from 126, it is down to about six, or maybe seriously affected only 3. The so-called Red Corridor has almost vanished now and is confined to a small pocket in Chhattisgarh and some parts of Odisha and Jharkhand. I think what has made the difference is strong political will and the whole of government approach. In conclusion, I would like to underline the point that the Indian democracy and India's constitutional order offer ample opportunities to all sections of society, all sections of population to participate in governance, participate in decision making, and steer the government policies and programs to get their due share in development and economic progress. The electoral democracy and the imperative of getting elected and re-elected is the surest guarantee against deprivation and exclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was, I think, a very clear articulation of where we have reached. I think the last major attack by Maoists was in 2020, and since then they have always been in defensive. Hundreds of them have surrendered. Over 500 of them surrendered last year. So there have been major successes of security forces, and as the Home Minister said, they are now effective only in 3 districts, which also we hope that we'll be able to eradicate them by March. I'll now request Shri Pankaj Kumar Singh, who's been the former Deputy NSA, the DG of BSF, and was involved in Chhattisgarh in tackling with Naxalite menace, to kindly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bansal of India Foundation, my fellow panelist, Shri Rajiv Gauba, distinguished audience, and thank you for the wonderful opportunity that you have given me to share my thoughts with the distinguished audience today. The only issue before me right now is when a stalwart of a panelist as Mr. Rajiv Gauba, who's been the Home Secretary and the Cabinet Secretary, has spoken for about 15 minutes on the LWE minutes, I have very few things to tell. He gave you facts, figures, background, the whole of government approach, and I don't know what to say. I don't know whether he had seen my notes and then... But thank you very much for that wonderful overview that you've given and the whole of government approach. I'll try to share my thoughts with the law enforcement angle that I was dealing with for about 2 years in Chhattisgarh. And I was sent there after CRP had suffered a major blow when 76 people were killed at one time. And with wonderful guidance from people like Mr. Rajiv Gauba, who was there in the Home Ministry. And we felt so strengthened, so emboldened, that we contributed our bit in the initial years. What started with Naxalbari in the late 60s and 70s, and with the Charu Mazumdar and Kanu Sanyal steering the movement, and with the strong will of the government in the early 70s, which was crushed, but the embers remained. And like was talked about, the MCC, plus they moved down to Andhra Pradesh, where they formed the People's War Group under Kondapalli Sitaramaiah, and in 2004, they combined to form the CPI Maoist group. Andhra Pradesh was the first state which was affected in a very, very major way. It evolved systems of its own, evolved greyhounds based on a very, very systematic approach. And not just law enforcement, but a huge complement of intelligence gathering machinery. And mind you, their intelligence gathering machinery was so good that they operated not only in Andhra, but in Jharkhand, in Chhattisgarh. They had their people who were monitoring the movements of the Naxals for 6 months, 8 months at a stretch, by hiring out accommodation in these states. And it is the other states which banked on the phenomenal information base that Andhra had about the Naxals. And when they systematically chased them out, the only sanctuary that they found was in Abuj Mar in Chhattisgarh. Abuj in dialect means jisko buj nahi sakte, you don't understand. And Mar is jungle. So jungle stretch which you cannot understand. That is what Abuj Mar is. It's about 5,000 square kilometers big, no revenue maps, not mapped till date, and no government establishments at all. And nobody was allowed to get in. That was the state of Abuj Mar, where the Naxals found their sanctuary. The leadership was again by the people from Andhra, and the foot soldiers were all from Andhra, Chhattisgarh, and other places. And this is where they started. And now Chhattisgarh, which had not seen this kind of a thing before, felt absolutely helpless. And like Mr. Gauba talked about, that they were totally at sea. They were not equipped, and they probably thought this will go away in some time to come. And one after another, the incidents started happening. It started way back, 2003, when Chandrababu Naidu was attacked. He just escaped with his life. 2010, Chintalnar, 76 people of CRP. 76 is a huge complement of force. And let me tell you, the Naxals used to talk about their PLG battalion and top-class PLGA number 1 battalion. Any one company of any CAPF, whether it is CRP, whether it's BSF, has better weapons than the PLGA battalion. But such was the psyche that no, Naxals are very big people, probably 10 feet tall, huge guns, machine guns, and big launchers that they have. And it is now, when they are surrendering, that the people in police in Chhattisgarh and Orissa, yehi log the kya? 5 foot big, 48 kilos, underfed, undernourished, and these are the people they were scared with. So that was the kind of image the Naxals created over a period of time. 76 killed, 2013, Jairam Ghati, where almost the Congress, 23 people were wiped out. Mr. V.C. Shukla also lost his life there. 2013 again, the Naxals evolved things to scare people. Look at one small incident. They killed about 6 CRP people, chopped off from the waist down, made an incision in the abdomen, placed ID inside the abdomen, placed a photocell above the ID, stitched the abdomen. Why were they doing all this? Their only job was, because if there's people see when the police or CRP or other law enforcement forces come in, they'll take them to the hospital, open it, and under the operation table lights, the photovoltaic cell would ignite, and then the ID blast would take place inside the operations room. Such were the sinister designs of Naxals when they were killing CRP people. Burkapal happened in 2017, 24 CRPF lost their lives, and 2021, Tekulguda, where again 23 police people were killed. Now all these things were happening and the state didn't know what to do. To give you one small incidence, no government agency would go beyond Raipur in Chhattisgarh to either examine the works or verify the works. All the signing, approval was taking place in Raipur. So 13 police people lost their lives in Chhattisgarh in a particular police station. Let's forget why they lost their lives or wireless was working on. The DG and I went to that police station. Now look at that. That police station was situated on National Highway. The National Highway was 10 feet wide, made of mud. And God knows how many times they would have taken money for repairs, making of highway. Such was the state, no government agency going, and so a lot of vested interests, money, corruption, and such methods were in the fray. And that is the reason I always said when I was there for 2 years, unless and until these things go away, there are too many vested interests involved, too much of money coming in, no audits, and that is why this is succeeding. The drawbacks. Now, different states had different strategies. Mind you, in the last 15 years that initially it started from 2000 to 2015, the center and the state were by and large different governments. They had their own strategy, they had a sense of mistrust, to the point that many a times, that sir would also know, that the state police and the central police would not even talk to each other. It is never the top people who suffer. It is the person at the ground level who ultimately suffers. With life, with amenities, 2 people of a particular force, because there was no camp, they went outside the camp for their morning call and were shot dead. Because they didn't want to dirty their camp. Such was the status. Prime Minister termed it as number 1 problem facing the country. And the corridor that was talked about, they said, we'll have a corridor from Pashupati to Tirupati. That was the corridor they talked about. Big incidents kept happening, but as time went on, even the government realized. MHA opened a specific LWE wing in 2006. The Government of India in 2015 came up with a national policy, which was to have dialogues, to have security, to have better cooperation between the different states. Home Minister, the then Home Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, came out with the policy Samadhan, an acronym for smart leadership, talked about incorporation of technology, aggressive strategies, motivation training, and these things. These things started having some of the other effect. Now, over a period, the Central Paramilitary Forces had gone in 2010, and over a period of 5-7 years, even they started acquiring intelligence, knowledge of terrain mapping, and got to know of what all strategies the Naxals adopted. The casualties, killings, kidnappings went down, but the Naxals continued with their IEDs, booby traps, ambushes, killing of police informers, or even on the pretext of police informers, and police were the only target for ambushes and killings. Why? You can get weapons or crude weapons. You cannot get ammunition from anybody else. Ammunition is not something that you can make. Crude weapons, yes. In fact, if you go to areas of Bihar, Rajasthan, UP, they will say to you, oh, are you confident with one shot? One shot is $1,500 katta. So it's that cheap. But they, in the towns of bigger towns, started making small motor launchers and things like that also. Even the law enforcement was strengthened in a big way. UAVs were given. And mind you, these are not small UAVs. These were big UAVs who could be up there for 36 hours. 110 crores each at that point of time. And these were taken away from the borders to be given for Naxal operations. Choppers, satellite imagery, satellite trackers, because if you go in these areas, there's no cell network. The telephones don't work. Direct line of sight, wireless doesn't work. You need something based on satellite. So satellite trackers came in, and they were distributed to the enforcement agencies in a big way. Rocket launchers, automatic grenade launchers, everything was given. There's no dearth of resources at all. And I must once again thank Mr. Gauba for all the support that we got, and that was the reason why we could go all out and without any fear or favor and tackling that. 2024, things really changed. Because 2023, a couple of elections in the country, and 24 also elections were looming ahead. Maybe the state governments relaxed, the killings, kidnappings all went up. So 2024, when the governments changed, and center, as well as in a couple of states, mind you, the major states, which were the sufferers, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, all got the same government as the center. Now this, in the last 15 years, for the first time, brought in a lot of synergy in action, thought, and implementation. Same governments, and Telangana and AP had done very well with their knowledge base as was resolved. The new news kind of was complete, with the governments acting in unison across 3 states. The directions were clear. There was phenomenal synergy and a lot of sharing of intelligence and knowledge about operations, and the movement of Naxal started flowing between the 3 different states. They launched a lot of operations, Operation Black Forest, Operation Karagattalu Hills, Operation Kagar, Operation Cleanup, and the number of most affected districts came down to 3 or 4 as of now. The number of killings way down from what it was in 2010 when it was the peak year. Now, there was something called the liberated areas. Naxals called these liberated areas where the writ of the government did not run. Now, fortunately, now with the more experience, more knowledge, more weaponry, more unison, and better coordination between the states as well as CAPFs and across the different states also, the more camps were created in these liberated areas, and so to say, these liberated areas were liberated by the state forces and the central forces. As a result of all this happening over a period of time, the domino effect started. It started last year with Basavaraju, who was the General Secretary, getting killed along with 27 others by Chhattisgarh police. Now, these people were well educated. He was a B.Tech. He was a Bachelor in Technology, General Secretary, 70 years old, and he had even gone to Sri Lanka for doing training of ID explosives. So this was the kind of experience these people had who were steering the movement. June 2025, 66 Maoists again surrendered in Chhattisgarh. Now this started, what is happening and why is all this happening? The state intelligence agencies were geared up to look for these chips and chinks in these organizations and tell them that now the states are very well equipped and we are way better than what you are at this moment. 13th September, Kishanji's wife Sujata surrenders. She had been for about 70 years. Now a lot of information came in that there was a lot of clash of ideology. Why should I not be the General Secretary? Why is he? He is a different caste, I am a different caste, I am from a different state, he is from a different state. A lot of clash of ideology, one-upmanship, and opinion making led to these surrenders and information coming in from different quarters. Bhupati, who was the brother of Kishanji, again, because of all this, surrendered once again. 61 people surrendered along with him. He was a spokesman, a BCom graduate, and spokesman since 2010. And it is one of these ideology clashes which led to his, and he was portrayed as a betrayer, a traitor, and by the Naxals, who even called out that if you want to come back, you people, you can always come back and we'll treat you with soft hands. But this Gadchiroli police making this surrender was a very, very big event which led to even further. Hidma, the military commander of PLGA battalion, and the strategist for 76 killings of CRPF, for the Jiram Ghati Congress killings and others, he was also killed in November 2025 by Andhra Pradesh police. He was the only Bastar tribal who had been accommodated in the Central Committee. All rest from AP and other places. On 19th November, Tech Shankar, he was the one who was the technology man in the Naxals. He devised rocket launchers, he devised barrel grenade launchers and other weapons. He was also shot dead by Andhra police. Today, the number of Politburo members, the number of CC Central Committee members has gone down drastically. They are hiding, they do not have a specific security apparatus around them, and they are on the run within an area of almost about 100 square kilometers spread across two states, Chhattisgarh and maybe Orissa. That is where they are right now. Many are in jail, many have been encountered in the current year also. The whole of the government approach, as was talked about, has been very, very successful here. This is the first incident in the Indian history where the whole of government approach, development plus security has paid rich dividends, and we see, as the Home Minister has said, the 31st of March, maybe it will finish. I only hope it doesn't finish before that. Number of towers, number of roads has all been elaborated. To give you an example, Bijapur was a district where the entire district in 2010 had one tower. One tower in the entire district, and that is when I was there. So I used to tell my family that if you're getting no information, that means I'm safe. Because if something happens, the information will come in fast. Number of towers now has swelled up to more than 9,000 plus. Roads, more than 10,000 kilometers. Bridges, vital bridges. And the amount of support that the central government has been giving to the states in security-related expenditure, special infrastructure scheme, fortifying of police stations is many, many fold. So this is where Prime Minister's scheme of whether it's for health, whether it's for housing, has all come in. For the first time, the mapping of Ajbujmar has been sanctioned. 5,000 square kilometers to be mapped by IIT Roorkee. It was there in the papers a couple of days back. So that now the government schemes, the infrastructure can go about in a very systematic manner. It's ironical that even after so many years of independence, we do not have a revenue map of 5,000 square kilometers within our own country. Jharkhand, Boda Pahad, as well as Saranda, has all been cleaned up. Orissa, Malkangiri, the cutoff area from where they would come in, and they shot almost about 25 greyhounds people in that area. Maharashtra, Gadchiroli is neat and clean now. Bihar, Chakrabanda, and Chhattisgarh, a couple of areas remain, but otherwise it's all been cleared up. But while all this has been cleared up and we are on the way ahead, I think the root cause we must always keep in mind. Why were the scheduled tribes dispossessed of land? Why was there marginalization of the scheduled tribes? Why were they not consulted when the big projects came in? All the Gram Sabhas were never consulted. Spread of state welfare. I think all that must be kept in mind when we think of moving ahead. Whether it's infrastructure, healthcare, education, or banking, I think everything has to go at an accelerated pace in a time-bound manner, henceforth, once this Naxals, so to say, CC members and Politburo members have been cleared up. The int-driven operations, the synergy between the states as well as the center, the CRPF, which has taken the brunt of it, more than 80 battalions, which is 80,000 people, only CRP. The 16 battalions of BSF, 16,000. All this is added to the state police. That is the amount of money, resources, manpower that the center has supplemented the states with, and that is why we are seeing the results what they are today. The liberated areas, by and large, gone. CRP, BSF, ITBP have contributed in a big measure. C60, every state developed their own specialized agencies. Of Maharashtra, Jharkhand Jaguars of Jharkhand, DRG of Chhattisgarh, SOG of Orissa, and of course the Greyhounds of Andhra did their bit. They even tried the Bastaria battalion that was talked about. Young boys of Bastar who would be more adept at climbing trees bare feet. Yeah, just a minute. Bare feet rather than with shoes on. Urban Naxals, just one word, what Sonu recently said, Polujula Venugopal Rao, who surrendered, said, urban Naxals are the people on whom the party is holding on, and most of them are selfish, lazy, and useless. They have used the party's name to enhance their academic and intellectual careers. So with just about 150 cadres and about 100 square kilometers, I think the pincer-like approach that the state and center has been adopting will certainly see the final results in the times to come. It's been a planned, a very systematic and strategy with a lot of synergy coming in as the multiplier. The target 31st March, I'm sure it will be met, there's no doubt about it, and the sacrifices made by the central and state police organizations, government officials, so to say police informers and common people and politicians also, I think will not go in vain. Thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj. We've heard two speakers who have been part of the government and have contributed immensely in curbing this left-wing menace. But there are questions which actually remain. In fact, as both of them said, why there was this menace? Because the development had not taken place. But I think more importantly, there was also a case of injustice, a perceived injustice. When Praveer Chand Bhanjdev was killed in Jagdalpur, there were actually wall hoardings in Madhya Pradesh which would say, Bastar ki galiyan suni hai, DP Mishra khuni hai. That was the words actually written. The fact of the matter is that in 1965, I have seen in Narayanpur surveyors from Survey of India. If 2025 we have to sanction mapping, there is something wrong. In 60 years, what did we do? If 1965 there were surveyors, it was not that Survey of India was not present in Narayanpur. So if it was there in 65, why it has taken? So there are a lot of questions. And I think now that we have heard the government side, we'll have Shekhar ji, who is, of course, will give you the dispassionate, neutral view on this particular success. While there is no doubt that success is unmitigated, I think over to you, sir.
Well, since you talked about the government side, I don't give the non-government side or anti-government side or the private sector side, which might have me labeled as a class enemy, right? If I said private sector. There is, however, a deeper issue here. The deeper issue is, I know we say that there was underdevelopment, Chhattisgarh, the tribal areas were ignored. There were many parts of the country which have been similarly ignored. Some worse, some not as badly, but some much worse. And some still continue to be ignored. How come armed extremism did not come up there? Armed extremism coming up in northeastern state is a different story. There are difficult neighborhoods there. When insurgencies came up in the northeast, East Pakistan was in existence. So there was very easy access there. There was very easy access to China. India and China both were not sending compliments to each other. The Chinese thought we were doing stuff with Tibetans. They started doing their own stuff with the Nagas in the 50s. So that is a different history. How come we found armed extremism come up only in these least developed zones of India? The reason is that people who thought this through had intellect. And we have to go back, and I don't read so much of the left literature. I did not go to any fancy university. I'm not naming any university. In any case, I graduated, my college years were 1974 to 76. That was the era of the emergency, so there was no politics. Plus, in the state of Haryana, our Oxford and Cambridge and Haryana is Government College Rohtak. From there, every chief minister comes, as does every ex-chief minister by implication. Mr. Manoharlal Khattar and I were the same batch there. So we have, that's our answer to Stephanians. That said, to think that Naxalism came in an intellectual vacuum is wrong. Naxalites were very smart people, so I never read this stuff earlier, but I've been reading some of it lately, particularly after I started writing about Naxals, about Maoist violence, say 2010 onwards. And my view, as many people said, and some people complained bitterly, somebody wrote an article, somebody even wrote in his book, without naming me, that I was maybe doing this on behalf of the corporates who wanted these mining leases in the Naxal areas. I was only repeating a principle that in any civilized society, the state must have the monopoly of violence, monopoly over violence. And it doesn't mean state can then go and shoot up anybody. That monopoly has to be used very carefully under the legal system, the laws, and the constitution. But no other, no matter what the grievances, has any business to pick up weapons and fight for their rights like that. That was a simple principle thing. And then the Chintalnar massacre took place, 76 soldiers were killed. Remember also, the loss of life was irreplaceable, but there was also the loss of weapons. No, weapons, armed forces can replace them. But can you imagine what those weapons mean going into the wrong hands? Because not only do they strengthen the rebels, but they also become a currency. They become a currency to be traded. These can be sold in return for God knows what to others. Now I see all the recoveries. People are surrendering and giving up weapons. I haven't seen any, at least as of now, I have not seen any mortars or rocket launchers recovered. In many of these ambushes, quite a few rocket launchers and mortars were lost. Can you imagine another gang of dacoits getting a 3-inch mortar or 2-inch mortar and attacking a police station someplace? So these were things that we were talking about. And that's when I started reading up. And then the same question that was on my mind, I figured that was a question asked by Kondapalli Sitaramaiah, who is effectively the founder of this Maoist insurgency. So in 1980, he wrote a bunch of writings which are now available in Naxal literature. And I think 2012, his collections were published by his daughter in a book. He said, he reflected on why did the Naxal movement fail in Naxalbari. And he said the reason it failed was, he said Charu Majumdar made 2 critical mistakes. One was that he failed to build an overground activist organizational network. Overground activist organizational network that could propagate ideology, mobilize support, and operate without attracting direct repression from security forces. That means you wanted an urban base for yourself, right? And we saw that that came up. Second, they failed to secure their rear. What does that mean? They failed to secure their rear base because they were carrying out activities in their own villages against their own landlords, where they were easily identified, cadres were easily identified and eliminated. Everyone knew everyone else. There were no urban support structures. And that's how, when he started rebuilding this, he started by building urban support structures. And he founded the Radical Students' Union. That was very overground, very urban, very young. And then it expanded from there. So that is how he built up an urban structure. And then because he had to secure a secure rear base, he chose India's most inaccessible regions. And these were in Chhattisgarh, now Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, then Bihar and Madhya Pradesh were together, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, Maharashtra, parts of West Bengal, these regions were almost stateless at that point, and there was a governance vacuum. So what did the Maoists do? As they reached there, they filled that vacuum by also providing governance. So if there were disputes there between two landowners, who would they go to? Going to a government court was very problematic, would take forever. You just went to the Maoist court and they settled it for you. So they replaced the government in these areas. They never had any hope of winning. They never had any hope of a revolution. But what they were counting on was that we will create such a nuisance that one day some government of India will say, come and negotiate with us. And when that negotiation starts, then we'll get our concessions, and the concessions would have been, they would not have been in the nature of increase state government's royalties over minerals. They would have been something like drive the corporates out, do this, basically ideological demands. And that was the strategic battle that they were fighting. That battle has gone up and down depending on the nature of the government in Delhi. See what happened in 2010. April 6, I think, 2010, the Chintaldar massacre took place. 76 CRP people were killed. These heavy weapons were stolen. 76 automatic weapons with rocket launchers and mortars. You can hold a state capital to ransom. Think about it. When the Bombay blasts took place, Pakistanis brought in AK-47s into Mumbai. I think 71 AK-47s were recovered, not including the 3 or 4 which were supposedly recovered from Sanjay Dutt, but which his friend actually burned in his foundry, for which he went to jail. An 80-year-old went to jail for 2 years. M.N. Singh, who was then handling Bombay anti-terrorism, he said Maharashtra police had never seen an AK-47. So you can imagine what these weapons can do in the wrong hands. So when this happened, and Mr. Chidambaram, Mr. Pillai, you will have recollections, he had become Home Minister after 26/11, and he decided to launch a more steadfast, a more organized assault on Naxal activity. Within 3 weeks, within the same month in April, Digvijay Singh wrote an article in the Economic Times saying, you can do all this, but all of this will not resolve the Naxal issue. You have to implement PESA, you have to implement Forest Rights Act, you have to take welfare, etc., etc. So this was an argument that in which I got caught. So I did some reading also of my writing from that period, which got me some bad press from one side of the debate. And I said, isn't that what the Pakistanis say about Kashmir, about that terrorism, that there are root causes? So if root causes don't justify one kind of terrorism or one kind of militant action, how can root causes justify another kind of militant action? And how can a state, a legitimate state, negotiate under pressure? And I remembered something, I think I also quoted it then, that Mr. Gill had once said. When Rajiv Gandhi signed his peace agreement with Sant Longowal, shortly after coming to power, and we had all gone to Anandpur Sahib that day because Longowal was going there. He was released from detention in Udaipur. And I got a message from local Punjab police, some DSP, saying that Gill Sahib is in Amritsar. He's now with CRP. He would like to see you. So I said, yeah, any time to meet Gill Sahib, since I knew him from Assam. So I went to see him next day in Amritsar. In the evening, he said, "Tum bade khush ho?" I said, "Kyun? Peace ho gayi." तो मैंने कहा खुश तो है, कभी पीस नहीं होगी, अभी ऐसे नहीं होगी, ये दोबारा से शुरू होगी, फिर हम आएंगे, फिर हम इसको सॉर्ट आउट करेंगे. तो मैंने कहा, do you have a vested interest in violence? Do you want to keep fighting all the time? Right? What's the problem? He said, nahi, you don't know who you are dealing with. He said, you can make peace with a bully when you hold the stick. जब लाठी आपके हाथ में हो. जब लाठी बुली के हाथ में है, you cannot make peace with the bully. And we know what happened in Punjab afterwards. Longowal was assassinated within 2 months of that, and then Punjab went on a decade of trouble. So we had that experience, and this argument did start. But 2009, UPA 2 had got elected with a larger number. Manmohan Singh actually became emboldened enough now to call Naxalites the biggest internal security threat to India. In less than a year, in April 2010, within 3 weeks of the largest massacre, the largest loss of life by uniformed personnel in India's history, except the night of Operation Blue Star. That was Chintalnar. Within 3 weeks of that, Vijay Singh writes his article, and the whole fight against Naxals is over. And Manmohan Singh never recovers. The Indian state never recovers. And then you see these books being written, then you see these flowery articles being written, that these are the nicest people, and that is around time that Avatar gets released, right? And probably Rahul Gandhi sees Avatar, right? And that's when the mining issue comes up in Odisha as well. So all of this got complicated. Maoists, therefore, got enormous amounts of help from this political contradiction and intellectual confusion. When these big ambushes took place, after Chintalnar, I think 2 big ones, there was a bus that was blown up in June, this the same year, where 31 were killed. There was another one. And I said, when I wrote, I said, what do you have the armed forces for? If Maoists think that you've become predictable, then the fact is that they've also become predictable. They will trap you, then they will come and loot your weapons, etc., etc. You have a couple of helicopters available. They can come and catch the Maoists in the open. There was a lot of pushback, and I think our army chief then said, army will never be used against its own people. I said, thank you, but are Nagas not your own people? Are Mizos not your own people? Are Kashmiris not your own people? Army has been used everywhere. Then, because the government of the day was seen to be weak, so the air chief also piped up. He said, the Air Force, the armed forces shall never be used against their own people. So in fact, we wrote an editorial saying, bhai, wo Navy chief ko kya ho gaya? Why is he not speaking up? Usko bhi to bolne do na. So it's almost as if everybody had positioned themselves on their own sides. Armed forces were on their own side. कि देखो paramilitary forces वाले बहुत समझते हैं अपने आप को, इनको अकल आ रही है. ये civilians को इनके बस की नहीं है. Politics had got divided. That's how in 2013 V.C. Shukla and other Jairam Ghati massacre took place, and the Naxals became really bold at that point because they had driven out the corporates, and the corporates that stayed there, they were collecting enormous amounts of money from them. There was, you call it extractive industry. Extractive industry was also being extracted from. That the death of your own fellow countrymen and women, no matter what politics they have, is always a very sad thing. So nobody should celebrate the fact that so many Maoists are dying. But the fact is that a menace, which Dr. Manmohan Singh once called the greatest internal security threat to India, is now going away. Because with the violence of this kind, there can be no governance either. And this is an argument I have seen in many places, in Punjab, in the Northeast, elsewhere. कि भाई आप encounter में मार देते हो, आप trial पर नहीं लेके जाते, don't follow the due process. And I would always say, and this is something I saw in Punjab, you kill the judges who try you, you kill the prosecution lawyers who go to court, you kill any witnesses, anybody who dares to appear as a witness against you, you kill editors who write about excesses against you, you kill owners of newspapers, then you say, give me due process, take me to court, bring me lawyers. So that's the exact definition of chutzpah. That it's like it's a kid killing his parents and saying, take pity on me, I'm an orphan. So violence carried out by unauthorized organizations is the death of governance. So to that extent, yes, India should be very chastened that such a thing happened in the heart of India. India should also resolve to itself that such a thing will not happen. But India should learn lessons, tactical lessons we've also read so much on the Naxalites from your father's book, who's written a definitive book on Naxalites in India. So these are tactical lessons. What India needs to learn is political and strategic lessons. And one of those key lessons is that when it comes to national security, there should not be polarization over the basics of that. And that is something that we suffered from, and we paid a very heavy price for it. I think I will conclude on that note and let you be.
Thank you, Shekhar ji. I think before we open for Q&A, just a minute. Well, Shekhar ji said that he studied in Haryana's Oxford and Cambridge in Government College, Rohtak. Well, I studied in Tribal Welfare School in Dantewada. And let me tell you, we used to sit on the floor and work, study. But half a century later, when I went there, the school was in same shape. We were still sitting down, still students were sitting on the floor and reading. So that's what I just wanted to say as far as development is concerned, those issues come to fray. What we also need to understand is what is an indication that a militant organization is losing or has lost the battle? They start sending interlocutors asking for negotiations and talks. I saw this in the last stages of LTTE. You would see all sorts of interlocutors coming to India. No, there should be negotiations, this, that. And the similar thing was happening in this phase. You have so many Naxalite sympathizers who would come. We need to have negotiations. We should have some negotiations. We should have this. We should have that. So that's a very clear-cut indication that the battle has already been lost by them. So that's just all. Well, it's open for Q&A. Please introduce yourselves and then ask the question and be brief. And in case you have a question for a particular panelist, be clear. First question, as always, to Bhaswati Mukherjee ji. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alok ji, and congratulations for organizing this amazing talk. My question is actually directed at my dear friend Shekhar, who spoke about urban Naxalism, the Naxalites in Bengal, and the one in Chhattisgarh. So I would like him to comment on the fact that when the Naxalbari and Naxalite movement started in my home state in West Bengal, it was considered to be over-intellectual and over-ideological and led by people who came from upper middle class Bengali homes, studied in Presidency College, whose lab was being used for making bombs, and who had no idea about the state of play in the rural areas that you're talking about. That is one point I wanted to make. And secondly, as far as Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand is concerned, because I've had the privilege of having a tribal lady housekeeper to look after me for 40 years. She's a tribal, she's a Roman Catholic. All her friends are tribals from Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. And she often told me that the problem was that the tribals wanted to break out from the stranglehold of these Maoists, but they could not do so precisely because, as the other two co-panelists said, there was a complete absence of governance, there were no schools, and in many areas which have been liberated now, many people had never seen a mobile phone or a television. So we have to then ask ourselves as a state and as a democracy, that how much are we to blame for this state of affairs? Because when you talked about Chhattisgarh being very underdeveloped, and that's why they decided to focus there, in my opinion, it was very successful because unlike the Bongs, the Bong Nakshals, whom I know very well, many of my cousins became Nakshals at that time, the Bong Nakshals are over-intellectualized and also focused on issues outside India, Vietnam, etc. Whereas these are really underdeveloped people who were neglected by the states. I'd like your comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Raja Munib and I have a very noob question. You know, often we see that you also spoke about CPIM as a political party which has been basically galvanizing this whole Naxal movement. And we are seeing the same thing we have seen in Kerala where PFI as an organization went ahead and is responsible for a large part of radicalization, spanning from Kerala till, I would say, not only Northeast, but till Bengal. And we still see PFI being banned, but SDPI, its sister concern, still operating. How is it that we deal with this kind of, I would say, dichotomy? Because at one point you are allowing the political thought, which basically fuels the violence, whether it is with the PFI or whether it is with the CPIM, to sustain themselves politically on the ground. But then we want to go ahead and just curb the violence. How does that work? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Gopal Pillai. I was Home Secretary during 2009, 2011. I just wanted one particular point which Shekhar Gupta mentioned that after, because I was there when the Chettanad incident and if you see the graph of Naxal violence, 2010 is the peak. And after that, it's all been a steady down. I think what Rajiv Gauba said, whole of government and this thing has been one of the great successes of the government. And I think that was something which was not there when we were there. But I can tell you that both in 2009, 2010, post the incident, and in 2011, till that time I was there, I don't think government ever, shall I say, in that sense, lost heart that we would. What changed in that period, and I know Vijay Kumar came as DG of CRPF, the whole concept changed from we would now function like the guerrilla group. All paramilitary forces, Central Armed Police Forces, would also operate at night, just like the Maoists, the LWE do. All the training was, you had the jungle warfare training school in Kanker and many other schools came up I think we learned a lot. We had that Lalgarh incident at that time, which is a liberated area which got re-liberated as Pankaj just mentioned. I think we learned a lot of lessons in terms of how to tackle them. And I think one of the real issues for the government as you move forward, I think to an extent, militarily wise, you I think succeeded, and it's a great achievement of the government. The real problem is really going to come post this, when you have to make sure that you don't allow this ideology or this thought of this exploitation to commence. Because I've traveled extensively in all these areas, and all of them said one of the root causes was not just lack of governance, was also exploitation by the government. In fact, the most hated people were the forest officer, the police officer, and the village officer. Between the three of them, they exploited the tribals to an extent which, I think it's really unfortunate. I think we learned some lessons, but we still have the issue of getting doctors into these areas. We still have getting teachers into the areas. I still deal in some of those areas with works with NGOs and others who are working there trying to get into the area. And I still find that we have the problem of getting people. Everybody wants to work in Raipur and Kanker, but they will not go to the remote Bastar areas and so on. I think that will be the real challenge before this government, because I agree with you, only state should have the monopoly on the state power. That I agree with you, and I think that philosophy has been there. I think the real change which really came out is this whole of government issue. I think that is what has made, I think, the big difference now. But I think where you have to really look out, and I think we look at, I'm just as a cautionary tale, look at National Mineral Development Corporation, NMDC. It is the only central public sector undertaking which has not been attacked by Naxals in the last so many years. And it pays through, shall I say, X method to the left-wing extremists. That which is why they have not got attacked. So you have to, unless you're able to curb financing, because financing is oxygen for the any group because it needs mobilized manpower and weapons and so on. So we have a lot of challenges. That's what I said. It's a great job done by the government. I think the challenges are going to be equally challenging in the next few years. Thank you.
Good evening, sir. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the speakers on. I'm Gurdeep Singh. I've had 40 years in a corporate role, including a directorship. I'd first like to congratulate all the speakers on some amazing dissertations. So, some of the eminent speakers did refer to the major urban base. And I would like to know what is being done to tackle that, because as they said, there are a number of people who have built their academic careers on being extremely leftist or extremely, and in fact the problem is not that it's among the students, it's amongst the faculty of a number of universities, including some in Delhi, which are actively supported and funded by the government. And these people have got a complete network of lawyers, etc., to keep them going. What are you going to do with this? Because if you don't do something, then there will always be some areas of dissatisfaction in the country where they will exploit that and give a rise to, again, violence.
Thank you very much. My name is Suhail. I am from Kashmir. So my area of study is like indigenous sociology of Kashmir, which I am studying from last 12 years. So my question is just an observation, like how we can, club some important terminologies like left, then nationalism and extremism. There is a heterogeneous dichotomies between the terminologies. An important point is like from last few years, especially from the intellectual circles, we are getting some new form of terminologies for nationalism and other, like nationalism or for that matter, urban nationalism as well. But the point is like being Indians and understanding the nuances of these things, like why are we turning a blind eye towards the literature? I mean, the literature which is coming from other sides, like how much provocative that literature is. And we have some circles now, that sleeper cell type circles who are discussing. The storytelling is still there. I mean, discussions are still going on. And that prolonged discussions, here lies the scope of the state, like how we can convert that seed which used to be germinated and which was very menaceful for the state. Now how we can convert that seed by developing the alternate circles which will be very productive in the near future. Thank you.
I'll now request the panelists to respond in the reverse order, starting with Shekhar ji.
I presume I am responding to Tota's question. You can decide, sir. All right. So first of all, I make a little bit of amends. I thought of starting this with a tribute to a wonderful friend of mine and much more senior friend of mine who's no more, but who had a key role in reorganizing the forces after the Chintalad massacre, Mr. E.N. Ram Mohan. And I should have thought of it because just last week, I spent all of last week on the north bank of Brahmaputra in the Dorang division, where I first met him when he was DIG there in 1983. And I had many conversations with him. And in his little home, sometimes sitting in his balcony or going out and talking in his balcony, that's where he died. In his tiny home, they had suffered a personal tragedy because their son had died in that IAF helicopter crash. And he would say to me that, look, these people, the leaders who've gone to the tribal areas, they are very smart people. They are intellectuals. They also believe in their ideology. They are true believers, but they are not fighters. What has happened is, because the state has been so weak there, they found their gun fodder. So these guys will not fight. They will get the tribals to fight for them. That's why the only tribal who rose to the central committee was Hidma, because otherwise his leaders were continuing to control everything. And you see these leaders, when they surrender, when they die, 67 years, 69 years, 72 years, which also means that over the past many decades, they've not been able to get young people like them to go there. The young people like them have all been shouting slogans in universities, right? Because they also know that there is value in doing this. You get your you get your benefits, but don't go and risk your life there. So they failed to build on that. And I do remember Mr. Ram Mohan once from his balcony saying, you're fighting these poor tribals there. See that man there, right? This was a man on a wheelchair who lived in his building in Dwarka. And he said, the guy hanging out there is the IB guy. The guy hanging out there is the special branch guy. This is the guy who's key to what's going on. But nobody will fight with him because he's too respectable to fight with. But we will unleash our armies on the tribals in Chhattisgarh. So maybe we have to rethink this battle. So I think that is the larger question to what you are saying. There is idealism. There is also ideology. But I don't think the tribals who were fighting were driven by ideology. However, where the gaps were, the Naxals filled those gaps. After all, they took doctors there. One of those doctors got convicted for sedition. And once again, I got bad press for it, but I did call out the UPA when the same doctor, after his sedition conviction, was stayed by a higher court, was co-opted in a committee of the Planning Commission. And I said, you may or may not like the sedition law, but he's a convict for sedition with a 10-year sentence. How can you mainstream him by bringing him, that is Dr. Benayak Sen. How can you bring him into a committee of the Planning Commission? That means you are legitimizing what's been going on. So many of doctors, teachers, schools were set up. So Maoists, through their networks, were also filling these gaps in tribal life.
Regarding the challenges that are going to come, absolutely, sir, on the dot. Finishing the Naxals or reducing their numbers is one small part. But getting the people in these underdeveloped areas, tribals who have not had access to whether any judicial system, court system, they only knew Jantana Sarkar, the kangaroo courts, who were there to sort out their issues in ways that were good or bad. But that was the only courts that they knew. Policing, yes, the policing on the pretext of you are another Naxal. And in the yesteryears, I think they were called Bhai Sabs in Chhattisgarh a lot. But when they started eliminating people, killing police informers, that is when the scare plus the absence of any kind of governance that came in. And that is what made the tribals go to these people. And it is absolutely essential in the times to come, well, with the number of roads that have been built, accessibility has been much better. Roads which were there in the yesteryears went into disuse because buses were blown up, vehicles were blown up, and the roads were still there. But people stopped going on those roads. But now, I think with the police getting in, law enforcement getting in, states, center pumping in huge amounts of money, SRE, SIS, road connectivity, bridges, I think a huge number of things have come up. Things like cut-off area, which was absolutely cut off, Bhopal-Patnam bridge, which was not there at all. Now, these things, I guess, in times to come will bring in access. I'll give you a very small example. There was this road in Bijapur which was being built about 20 kilometers, and about 26 people had lost their lives because of blasts, because of the Naxals burning the road building machines, and that road was called Khuni Road. Khuni Road, done. So once the road got built, the government moved out. They gave these small transport vehicles, Magic and these vehicles, and they told the village people, you will drive this vehicle, we'll give you 10,000, 5,000 rupees a month, and you will bring in people from the village to this main town free of cost. Now the Naxals will never antagonize or make the locals angry. All the killing stopped, and they were getting much better price for their products in the towns, and that is how the common life started, and they started seeing the benefits of roads and infrastructure being built. So the government has to provide, act as the provider, and then gradually move out. I mean, it is the people ultimately, once they take over, I think a whole lot of things stop. But Naxals, Shekhar Gupta Sahab said, why did they start? You see, Naxals have always operated. Any person who is acting against the system always has his rear or an escape route planned out. Now that will only happen in these places whether it's Saranda in Bihar, whether Chakrabanda in Bihar, Saranda in Jharkhand, forests are there. Then mining activity, huge amounts of explosives are there, which you can have access to if you don't get weapons or ammunition. Now, explosives, mining is one area where a whole lot of irregular things go on. I personally know of people who were called in from other states in Chhattisgarh. The front man, the mine was allocated in the name of a politician, but they were called because if I pay through the different means to the Naxals, I have a lease for this amount and I can mine for this much. This was a regular feature in all the states, and you see you have mines in all these states where the tribals were exploited, and it was basically the corporates or others who owned the mines who were making tons of money. There's one rail route which goes from Chhattisgarh till Andhra ports to take that iron ore from NMDC, 8 kilometers of mountain, just iron ore, fantastic iron ore. Why don't they destroy these railway routes? One, jal, jungle, jameen hamara hai. But ye bhi hamara hai. And this overrules everything. So, yes, but ultimately I think the system has to find a way to do away with these things, provide the infrastructure, facilities, banking, everything. I still remember when we gave choppers to the banking people to put money in the different ATMs which were there at different places. How do you go and fill them up? Because the money would dry out. So, with so much of infrastructure coming in, I guess in times to come, things will improve and the systems will once again start functioning.
I think this entire narrative about the exploitation of tribals and absence of development as the root cause of Naxalism and its origin and then spread is a little overstated. It's, Naxalism did not start in Bastar or in Jharkhand or in the tribal areas adjoining Jharkhand in West Bengal. It started in 1967 in Naxalbari of Siliguri subdivision, of Siliguri district, Naxalbari subdivision. And the farmers or the peasants there, they had started organizing themselves with support from some elements in the CPIM. And they actually started seizing forcibly land from the landlord, the Jotdars, 2 days after the first non-Congress government was sworn in, in which CPIM was a coalition partner. And these people had the support of Charu Majumdar and Kanu Sanyal, Shekhar Gupta ji referred to them, Jangal Santhal, who were at that time members of CPIM. And they were in power now. They could have waited. So there was ideology in the beginning. These people were, to which Ms. Mukherjee also referred to. These people had that, romantic sort of attachment to the idea of communism and armed rebellion and overthrow of the elected government, etc. So that is how it started there. But even before that, I think in 1946-51, there had been a major peasant uprising against the oppressive landlord system supported by Nizam of Hyderabad.
In Telangana.
Within Andhra Pradesh. And that is how the entire, now the leadership coming from some of the engineering colleges, that is the reason. So it is not the tribal thing, that is overstated. And then, yes, the tribal areas provided fertile ground because they were inaccessible. Forests were there. And we have, as a system, as a polity, created this fiction, I would say, half fiction, myth. And that has resulted in a tentative and faltering, ambivalent approach to dealing with this problem. So it started there in Naxalbari, then earlier in Telangana area, Nizam, Hyderabad, that area, and then it found fertile ground in these areas. And you see, development, 1980s, early 80s when I started working in this in government. Infrastructure, what we see today in the country, and then that was different, India. It is not that the other parts of the country were, very developed and there was great infrastructure. There was, our GDP then was different. We were at a different stage of development. So it is not that these areas were particularly, underdeveloped. They were particularly exploited, or the government or the police and the forest officials were particularly exploitative. No, it was the terrain which provided, and these tribals, again, mind you, in the beginning in Bihar, Naxalism was in Muzaffarpur, North Bihar, far away from the tribal area, central Bihar. Then it spread to Chotanagpur areas, the forest areas. And Aurangabad is also not non-forest. See, Aurangabad, Gaya, Nalanda, all the districts where I have worked, Patna, large parts of Patna district then, rural areas, Masaudi and all, they were Naxal infested. There was no, it was not, there was no tribal there. So, and there the reason was, you see, caste exploitation, caste-based exploitation. There was nothing like that in the tribal areas because you don't have caste. It's a more egalitarian society. So there was lack of employment opportunities, etc. And so this movement found fertile ground. And then over time, it had become completely bereft of ideology. Yeah, you had some ideology, ideologues and all that. But most of the recruits, they were doing it just as a, alternative employment. Easy money and the, appeal of having a gun. And that's how it was our ambivalent approach. Part of it was underlined by Mr. Shekhar Gupta. As a government, as a state, soft state syndrome, which allowed this to fester and prosper for a very, very long time. Yes, state government, central government were dealing with them, but not in the all-out manner in which an internal security challenge in any part of the country or external security should be handled. So that is how I think we came to where we were in 2010, it was a peak, and up to 2014, and then the whole of government approach, by what I meant was saturation approach to the development, all schemes, massive upgradation of security infrastructure, security forces, arms, the police camps, one of which I visited when Pankaj was there, I think 2nd or 3rd December 2014 when I was additional secretary. I think it was Chinta Gufa. So the security personnel, the kind of facilities that they had were very, very basic. So those were massively upgraded. That is how you lifted their morale. And then, of course, the drones and the, helicopters and UAVs. So you have to bring the whole might and also perception management. You see, the licentious lifestyle which the Maoist leaders had over time, they had palatial houses in Patna and other urban centers. Their children were studying in boarding schools. We did not expose it earlier. And also, this urban phenomenon which is referred to, intellectuals, academicians, some of them may be misguided, some of them may not be aware, but some were aware that they were providing logistical support, money, etc. And when you do that to a band of people who are killing civilians and police personnel, then you must be called to account. So whether you call them urban Naxals or whatever, they have to be dealt with, they have to be brought to book. And I think that is the kind of approach that is required to deal with any internal security problem. And yes, going forward, so now the infrastructure has improved vastly. People have tasted the benefits of development. Telecom, towers were not being allowed to be erected. Now 9,000 towers have been erected. Roads have been built. And let us remember that this region, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, it is potentially one of the richest regions of the country. And it can power the economic growth of the entire eastern India and beyond. You have to develop the mineral wealth, ecotourism, forest and all that. And last, I think I would like to underline this point again, that our democratic system, our constitutional, architecture, the system of elections, the imperative of getting elected and re-elected, that is the biggest guarantee to the people, any section of society, to participate in governance and to participate in the fruits of development. So, there will be uneven progress. It can't be always equal. That cannot be a justification for this kind of, violence, mindless violence against security forces, against civilians, to be allowed to continue for this long. So I am extremely happy and relieved, having seen this problem right from the beginning of my career in different parts of the that this is coming to, hopefully, an end in 2026. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I must thank all the panelists for wonderful remarks, but I must just make one point which I wanted to make. See, I lived in Bastar. I lived in Sukma in 60s. I lived in Kondagaon. I lived in Narayanpur. I have gone there and I have seen. I could go into the jungles. There was no Naxals. Underdevelopment was there that time also. Injustice to some extent was there. Brahmadev Sharma in 1970 actually forced NMDC people to come and take those exploited girls from tribal society. But ideology was not there. Very often we undermine the ideological framework under which a militant organization works. Very often a militant organization crumbles when its ideology is actually suspect or fails. There is a very wonderful novel, Hajar Chaurasi Ki Maa, that shows that when the Lenin statue in Moscow came crumbling down, the people started questioning, what was I fighting for? Was it justified? See, there was a time when a large number of urban youth romanticized this sort of urban. The reason why armed forces didn't want to fight was this reason, because there was a significant section of the society which did not find fault with him. It was wrong for armed forces to go and fight with them who were actually considered to be righteous at that point of time. So the failure of ideology was a very, very important factor for the success of this drive, which very often we don't look. As the ideology faltered, as the ideology failed, and as the youth realized that this was a flawed path, I think the success was essential. Of course, there were means for that, which required infrastructure, which required connectivity, which required other things. But ideological framework is always important. For any ideologically driven organization, ideological understanding is essential, and countering that ideology is equally important. Be it any radical organization, be it radical Marxist, be it radical Islamist, you can take any organization, you have to counter that ideology also, because that actually destroys the organization eventually. Of course, the tactical means would be there. I think Shekharji wanted to make...
Just one passing mention on the question of resources. So this is a conversation from about 15 years back when Rupert Murdoch was traveling in India. So I can report this conversation. I think I've written about it. So there was a dinner for him, as in the American way, the chief guest goes from table to table, round table to round table talking. So he came to our table and he said that, see what the Chinese have done to Japan. The Japanese acted funny over the islands and the Chinese stopped giving any critical minerals to them. So Sony, Panasonic, everybody came to a standstill and the Japanese went down on their knees. That's because of something called rare metals. What we call as critical minerals now, he said rare metals. He said Chinese now control 80% of the world's rare metals. The rest of the world has about 15%. At least 5% of all of the rare metals are in your country. If your country can't even touch even 1% of that 5%, and you think the Chinese have nothing to do with it, because you can't touch it because of Maoists, and you think Chinese have nothing to do with it, you live in cloud cuckoo land, right? So that was on the resources issue. The other is the ideology issue. Just think about how ideologies decline. Just 10 days back, 26th of December was Mao's birth anniversary. More importantly, it was the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party of India. It passed without any mention anywhere. The important thing is the CPM did not even send CPI a congratulatory message because they said, "Tum kaun hai? Hum Communist Party hai." So the communist ideologies have spent these decades looking for advice from Beijing, from Moscow, then only Beijing, then God knows where, then Chavez, right? Chavez came to India after UPA came to power, and he was lionized and taken all over the country as if the revolution had broken out. So there are confusions of ideology also, which have finally contributed to this unraveling.
Thank you. I'll just request my colleague Aranita to come to the stage for felicitations.
Thank you so much, sirs, for the enriching discussion. I now request Major General Dhruv Katoch, Director, India Foundation, to kindly come up on stage and felicitate the panelists. Thank you, sir.